as you know, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins for the Black Business School in Your Black World. And there's a lot going on in the world, a lot going on in the media. And today I get a chance to speak to a person that I respect a lot, my mentor, my friend, my respected colleague, a person that is arguably the most respected Black scholar in the world right now, definitely in our world, Dr. Claude Anderson. How you doing today, Dr. Anderson?
I'm fine, buddy. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, very well, very well. There's a lot happening in the world right now. There's a lot of debates happening, a lot of people talking about various political issues that where I think that an elder such as yourself, meaning a person that has some experience politically and otherwise that cares about Black folks, should chime in on. Have you been following what's been going on in the media recently with this whole conversation about illegal immigration and everything else?
Well, yeah, I've seen a little bit of it on TV, and let me be perfectly candid with you, and be perfectly honest with you, I just think it's grossly insultive to me, to be honest with you. Now, we all need to be humanistic in our opinions and our feelings about other people, and trying to help where we can. And but I just find it so ironic and so sad that right now, even the Black leadership in this country and invisible Blacks are rushing down to be concerned about children that are being separated from their parents on the borders of this country, that are coming into the country illegally. And about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they had about 115,000 of them show up at the border coming into the country. They're illegals. That's a fact. But what really concerns me more so than the fact that this country is so obliquely and so totally supportive of immigrants coming to the country, and immigrants' children, to make sure they got proper care, food, health, education, and a place to live. But they've never expressed the same concern about Black folk. And I think it's a gross insult. And I look on TV and I see all these Black members of the overclass, the members of civil rights organizations, members of the Black political orbit, rushing down to do something for immigrant kids coming to the country illegally. But they've never expressed the same amount of concern for Black folk in this country, for Black children. Let's go back to slavery for a second and bring up to date. Throughout slavery, Dr. Watkins, it was a common practice to separate Black parents from Black children. As a matter of fact, they're doing slavery, they would sell them into what they call Deep South. As soon as they got them age, they would sell them or trade them off to another farmer or to another plantation owner. And they set up 3 states like North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland became slave breeding states, where they intentionally impregnated Black women to produce Black kids so they could sell them as soon as they got to be about 5 or 6, 7 years of age to work in the fields. Nobody expressed any concerns about that. They didn't try to, that was a destructive element of the Black family in this country. And nobody expressed any concerns for 360 years about how Black children are being separated from the parents. Then later on, up in recent years, foster care homes, the same thing. They've been pulling Black kids away from the home, put them in foster care. Nobody expressed any concerns. So I am not only insulted, but I'm angry over the fact I got Black leaders and visible Blacks in this country expressing such profound and intense concerns about the humanitarian efforts in this country should be demonstrating towards immigrant children coming into the country. But at the same time, in this country, 38%, Dr. Watkins, 38% of all the Black children in America that are native Blacks, 38% are beneath the poverty line. Nobody's expressing any concerns about that. And I go to a lot of major cities in the country right now, like Detroit and St. Louis and other cities, that you got 50% of all the Black kids graduate from high school cannot read and write. I don't hear any concerns about that. And I found all these Black kids now in gangs, they're selling drugs, trying to earn enough money to feed themselves. I had kids coming to school with no food in their belly. What they have for breakfast is a darn bag of potato chips and a soda pop, a bottle of pop. I don't see any concerns being expressed about that. When I see all these Black kids now strung out, and either impregnated and by another youngster, and can't find jobs, 51% unemployment rate in the country. Nobody expressing concerns about that. 87% of the Black youth in America right now can't find jobs. I want these Black leaders and these Black civil rights leaders to cut the BS. And I'm gonna ask the question, I'm raising it with you, and I want you to raise it across this country in my name if you want to, and ask your listeners right now, your viewers, what does it take What does it take? That's the question I'm asked. Those 3 words. What does it take for black folk to wake up and smell the coffee, start taking care of their own people, expressing that kind of concern for their own? They've never done it, because you see in this country that immigration is synonymous with European immigrants coming to the country, or anybody who can be classified as whites. Immigration is a code word for anything other than blacks. The immigration policy in this country throughout the nation history since 1790 has been anti-black. Immigration policy anti-black. So why in the world would the only people that's negatively impacted by immigration is black folk? So why are black folk rushing down to try to rescue white kids or non-black kids and pretend that somehow they're obliged to be the carrot and burden for morality around the world, to be the great humanistic people that take care of everybody but their own? Please tell me that, and tell me what does it take, and have your listeners call and tell me today, what does it take for black folk to wake up and smell the coffee and have some self-concern about their own people, Dr. Watkins?
Well, you know, I tell you what, the coffee's been brewing for a long time, but I think our nostrils are broke. I think we got our nostrils covered up because we can't smell the coffee, and we still sleep for, you know, most of us have been asleep. And everybody, by the way, I'm talking to Dr. Claude Anderson. We're talking about this whole conversation on illegal immigration. You know, this whole thing where our heartstrings are being pulled by this separation of families and the trauma on the kids and stuff like that. And what we're basically saying, we're not saying that the kids deserve any of this. What we're saying is that what black people have gone through and continue to go through is 100 times worse. And you ain't never seen all these white folks, all these Democrats and everybody else is trying to get you to feel sorry for somebody else's kids. These very same people have never felt sorry for your kids. These same people have never felt bad for you. But I want everybody to know the Harvest Institute is where Dr. Anderson does his work. He's one of our leading scholars. He's fighting for black people. He's doing very important work, including a lawsuit on reparations. Please, please, please go there and make a donation at some point. It's harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. That's where you can go support his think tank. We need to support black think tanks just like white folks support white think tanks. We need black think tanks. So that way we can have people out here that are on our side, that are supported and taken care of, because part of the reason they sell you out is because somebody else is paying their bills. So we have to support our own. That's very important. Now, Dr. Anderson, let me ask you about this. Then, so, you know, in your book, Black Labor, White Wealth, you know, I was looking up, you have a section on ethnic immigrants in your book. And you said something that was interesting about, you know, kind of how black people are sort of expected just to sort of be lumped into, to accept the idea that we should be lumped with any immigrant that comes from another country. That we, you know, that they're struggling because they're from, you know, wherever it is, Scotland or somewhere, and we're struggling because we're black. So we're supposed to be the same, and we get the same programs and everything else. And you've always said that that's not really going to work, or it's not fair to us. And so what I'm gonna read what you wrote here, and then I'd like to get your thoughts on that. You said that grouping blacks with lesser aggrieved groups, in effect, mutes and obscures the legitimate grievances of blacks while veiling the moral, legal, and financial responsibility the dominant society has to correct the suffering of 36 million black Americans. So it sounds like you were saying here that when we get lumped together, it kind of waters down our pain, waters down our experience, and allows people to kind of get away with ignoring that. Like they can say, well, look, let's all go take care of these, you know, 2,000 immigrant kids, but we're going to forget about the 2 million black kids who went through something 10 times worse. Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, well, I'll be glad to. The whole immigration process, as I've said before, started in 1790, and it was designed specifically and solely to reward and compensate and provide unearned benefits to people coming in here who will be classified as immigrants. Blacks are the only non-immigrants in the country. That's why your first immigration law set up in 1790 was strictly for those other than black folk coming into the country. Now it was modified again later on after the Civil War, again, where it was broadened so that anybody coming into the country at that time, Southern Europeans and Jews and all were coming into the country, that they could come in as immigrants. But black folk have never been treated like immigrants. And immigrants have a negative impact on black folk. It always have. And up until about the turn of this century, every so-called black leader in the history of this nation, whether you talk about Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, they were always opposed to immigration. They're saying it's not right, it's not fair, it's immoral for you to keep bringing in people into this country and giving them land, resources, access to things and rights and privileges that you're denying to black folk. This was up until about 1900, early 1900s. Black folk were screaming. W.B. Du Bois saying the same thing, that black folk do not get any benefits. Other people get the entitlements that black folk should have. And more importantly, those immigrants come in here, they begin to injure black folk. Black folk are a permanent minority in a society where the majority will win and rule, Dr. Watkins. That's why in the year 2000, we had enough Hispanics coming in alone, because their population in 100 years went up over 5,000% to be able to pass black folk and surpass black folk, where black folk had been second-class citizens in this country, have been second-class citizens in this country for 360 years. All of a sudden, Hispanics started pouring into the country based on a policy they set up in 1975 out in Kansas City, that they were going to displace black folk by the year 2000 by classifying anybody who speaks Spanish around the country, around the world, and suggest and drive them into the United States to displace, remove, and subordinate black folk. They hit it dead on the head. So black folk became third-class citizens in the year 2000. And in a society where the majority will win and rule, black folk also became third-class citizens. That also wiped out the black vote. You hear all these Democrats talking about their rights to vote. Black folk cannot win by voting. You're 13% of the population, and you were always outnumbered, almost again, about 9-1 by whites and other groups. Now when the Hispanics took over in the 2000, you're now outnumbered 10-1. That means that your vote is now null and void by just by the Hispanic vote. Where Hispanics now, where you wake up 44% of the population, these immigrants now, Hispanics alone, they now make up 57 million. They've outnumbered your vote. Your vote is null and void just by Hispanics alone. In a society we can, well, our vote count. Your vote does not count. Nobody needs your vote, because they now replaced you. And all these other groups coming in the country, they're coming in the country to take up what you should have. Secondly, black folk don't understand that, because too many of our people are intellectually lazy, and those in political positions in public office, either through appointments or election, they are criminally incompetent. They don't understand the negative impact that immigration has on black folk. They won't go out and fight to try to say black folk must be protected, just as the second Constitution specified in the civil rights laws, 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, that black folk must be treated in all manners similar to whites. And if white folk are not being negatively impacted, Dr. Watkins, by immigration, then you're violating the Constitution by bringing in people over them that's negatively impacting black folk and only black folk alone. That's why in Obama's administration, let's take employment. You got an over 51% national employment rate in this country. And while from 2006 up to Obama left office, almost 47 to 51% of all the jobs, new job hires, went to Hispanics, even though black folk have a 51% unemployment rate. Hispanic unemployment rate now somewhere like about 4.6. And white unemployment was 4.3. Asian and Arab unemployment rate is almost zero. The only people got a massive unemployment rate that is structural. They keep telling me black folk unemployment rate is only double white. That's a lie. You got a structural unemployment rate that immigrants is feeling. They come into the country. They're shutting black folk down because we have black folk that have given up and never have a job again. The job roles and reports are based on two things: people are searching for jobs and those who are collecting unemployment compensation. And immigrants are displacing blacks in jobs, displacing blacks in education, displacing black folk in employment opportunities, displacing blacks in educational programs. You go to Florida and California, most of the administrators in those communities now, they're displacing black teachers, the black administrators with Hispanics. It's the negative. And then in conclusion, my remarks is that what our political leaders that want to be the great humanitarians and save everybody their own people, what fail to understand is that there is, as Newton's third law, which says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You can't bring in all these immigrants and provide all them all these benefits and services and goods and jobs and employments and schooling and not impact something negatively. It's black folk that's being negatively impacted. And I'm sick and tired of black leaders betraying their own race to try to go out and try to save the world while their own people suffer and perish.
All right, everybody. I'm talking to Dr. Claude Anderson, author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, and Dirty Little Secrets. If you want to find his books or make a donation to his institute, you can go to harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. We also have copies of his books available at blacklaborwhitewealth.com. That's blacklaborwhitewealth.com. Make sure you hit the like button, share button, subscribe button so that everybody can hear this conversation. We're competing with big media, so we really need your help in terms of spreading the message of ideas in the black community that are not consistent with what people are telling us to think, but independent ideas from people who care about you. Dr. Anderson, let me ask you about this. I couldn't quite find it in your book. Just so everybody knows, when I'm looking down, I'm looking at his book. Right? This book, Black Labor, White Wealth, is literally ripped up and written all in and everything else because I go through it repeatedly. This is one of my Bibles in terms of books that I really go through all the time. You talk in the book about how immigration laws have been used. I thought it was interesting how you mentioned that black leaders, before we got into this case of the black overclass being controlled by the Democratic Party, that you said back, in the past, black leaders were not in support of open borders and extreme, immigration and all this other stuff. And also what was interesting is that I remember reading in either this book or Powernomics where you talked about how the percentage of black people in this country, the percentage of Americans that were black, like meaning the size of our collective, has shrank as a result of deliberate immigration policies designed to dilute the power of the black vote. Can you kind of speak to that? Just how much has that changed? Like, for example, if I go back 100 years or 150 years, what percentage of the American population was black back then versus the percentage of the population that's black right now?
Okay, good. That's a good question, Dr. Watkins. Up before the end of slavery, in the South, black were the majority population in about 6 to 7 southern states rather. They were the majority population. You start talking about Georgia, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana. Blacks were the majority population in those states. In some cases, black folk were over 50% of the population. That was a big threat. That became the big threat that really triggered the Revolutionary War. Was that the colonists, the white colonists, got concerned that they had such a large, significant black population, and they bringing in more, and they didn't want any more shipped in here because they got fearful that the blacks would hook up with the Indians and they could drive whites out of the United States back to Europe. And so they tried to stop the European royal companies, the royal slave companies, which again we talked about the prince and this marriage recently and royalty getting married. They had the royal slave company. That's what shipped all these blacks into here. And they wanted to stop them from shipping in anymore in here. And but blacks were the dominant population. So what they set up two policies that these are very important policies for our people to remember this, is that in the South, because black folk were the dominant population, what they're saying is that if you send any more blacks into the South, in those plantations, the rule and the Carter Principle came out in the slave law of 1705, and also which says that that here's the restrictions again would apply starting in 1712. And here's what it says basically, 1710 rather, is that for every black person in the South, if you must, every 4 or 5, you got to have at least one white person there to monitor and patrol and monitor them. That was called the Diversity Act, Dr. Watkins. You keep hearing about diversity. The Diversity Act came out in 1705 slave codes, which says we got to have somebody to monitor and watch these people to make sure they don't create any disturbance, don't have any riots or slave revolts. And the first in South Carolina, that's what started. The first police force, Dr. Watkins, came out of South Carolina based on the Diversity Act. And that's why they had badges. They called them patty rollers, where they had to monitor blacks on the roads to make sure that they were not plotting or scheming to escape. But they say so for every 4 to 5 blacks in the South, you must have at least one white. And so the whites charged every European nation to clean out their prisons, their mental institutions, and their jails, and the insane asylum, to ship whites over here to help monitor these blacks. That's why Georgia came into existence, to be a filtering state element for blacks trying to escape to get out of slavery. They ship whites in here, even out of milk prisoners and everything else, to make sure they monitor and control black folk. That's where your patty rollers, that's where your police forces came from. They had badges to make sure that they could check blacks, make sure that they were not causing any problems. They had to protect white lives, white property, and everything else. That was called the Diversity Act of 1705. Nowadays, they got blacks going around championing diversity by bringing in more immigrants into the country and trying to make sure they got women, gays, everybody in the Diversity Act, not knowing that went into effect against black folk. And again, this was again spoken and related to by in the Davis case in 1978, the Davis case, when the Supreme Court says that the only people who can legitimately be entitled to affirmative action and reparation should be black folk, not minorities, not poor folk, anybody else. And guess what? All the Hispanics, Asians, and Arabs, everybody says, we know that we've not been treated like blacks, but it would just appear better if we and be more acceptable if we have them included with blacks, and we had diversity. So that's when the diversity thing popped up again. And yet you got blacks screaming about diversity in history, and in the recent years, 1970s, they're loving diversity, and diversity is anti-black based on immigration.
Wow. Well, you know, Dr. Anderson, what's interesting to me, and I assume it's still true. I know you mentioned it in your book, Black Labor, White Wealth. You mentioned this 25 years ago. I think it's still true to this day. You know, a lot of people talk about this black-brown coalition, that being black means you're automatically aligned with the whole Hispanic community politically. I don't see that. I see it being a one-way street. I see us supporting them and them not really supporting us like that. And what you mentioned, which I think is still true, is that the vast majority of Hispanic people that come from south of the border to the U.S. classify themselves as white. Is that still the case, or has that changed?
Yes. No, they hadn't changed one iota. That's exactly right. What people don't understand is that what they've done, they've corrupted the whole concept of civil rights and stuff to dilute black folk down, to make sure there's no threat to the society, just as they did back in, as I said, centuries ago. Because immigrants come to this country are reclassified, and to prepare to make it be race-based. Hispanics are nothing but white folks speaking Spanish. They're a culture group. They're not a race, and they're not a race group. They throw them in the category of a minority to dilute and water down and keep the black man tamed and restrained by throwing him into the pot against him. So Hispanics are nothing but white folks speaking Spanish, and they come in with an incentive over black folk with their culture, their language, and being white. They get 3 or 4 advantages over blacks. Arabs come in this country, they are classified as whites. They're just practicing Islam, but they're classified as whites. They have their own culture and their own language, so they get advantages over black folk. The same thing with Asians. The Asians were on probation to be white now, but the Yick and Woke decision back in the 1880s and also in the 1920s said that under no circumstances would the Asians said that they want to be associated, identified with black folk. Now, why this is important to answer your question is that during slavery, 98% of all the white people in the country were opposed to black folk, did not want them freed from slavery. Now here we are, 150 years later, and still, according to research, 88 to 90% of whites still don't care about black folk. There's still massive hate for black folk in this country, even 150 years after slavery. But in terms of immigrants, there's 63 to 64% of all the immigrants come to this country. Asians, Arabs, and Hispanics, they are opposed to black folk, do not want to be associated with, identified with black folk under any circumstance. They don't want to be they're not your friends, they're not your allies. Black people, native blacks have no friends and allies. And that's why the Asians will tell you up front that they're not going to do business with black folk. They're not going to hire black folk. They're not going to buy from black folk. And yet I can find something like about 137,000 Asians who become multimillionaires off of selling products to black folk. I can't find one black person who become a multimillionaire off of selling something to Asians. The Asians said, we don't play that. It's against our culture to buy from black folk, to be identified with black folk. You got 2 Supreme Court decisions that was rendered that says that that Asians will not be put into schools or associated in black communities with them, with black folk.
Really?
And black folk talking about people of color. What people of color are you talking about? You should be talking about black folk. You're going to integrate with your own damn people first. Quit trying to integrate with people based on culture, on gender, on handicaps, on poverty. That's what we keep. That's what your civil rights leaders want to do. They in 1970s they got co-opted by non-economic liberalism in the country and decided to give up and surrender and start accepting everybody as being equal to black folk, which handicaps black folk.
Wow. Everybody, this is Dr. Claude Anderson, author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, and Dirty Little Secrets. Go find out about his books, find out about his work. And also, please, I hope you'll consider making a donation at harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. Also, make sure you hit the thumbs up button, subscribe button, follow, share, like, all these things. Pass the conversation on, join the conversation. This is what we do on Intellectual Chocolate. We give you things that you're not going to get anywhere else. Also, if you really want to get it in up close in person and to meet all the other people that follow what we're doing, come to the All Black National Convention. Dr. Anderson will be there. Kenny Gamble will be there. A lot of people will be there. I'm going to reach out to see if Jay Morrison can make it. I think he can. And a lot of other great black people who are doing amazing things. So if you really want to fellowship with black people and be in a space where black strength is there, come to the All Black National Convention, September 27th through the 30th in Philadelphia. You can learn more at allblacknationalconvention.com. That's allblacknationalconvention.com. Now, Dr. Anderson, let me ask you this.
Doctor, can I make one point that can answer your earlier question? I wasn't specific enough for you. You asked me what has changed in terms of black status in population throughout history. Very quickly, that on the eve of the Civil War, you only had you had less than about 4,000 to 5,000 Hispanics in the entire United States. Did you hear what I said? You only had about 4,000 to 6,000 Hispanics in the entire United States. At the same time, you had 4.5, almost 5 million black folk in America. Now, now compare that quantitatively. You got somewhere between 4 to 6 thousand Hispanics in the entire United States. You got 4.5, almost 5 million blacks in the United States. Now that was at that time. Now move that up to 1900. Let's move up 40 years now. At that point in time, when slavery ended, Hispanics started coming in. Hispanics went up by 1900 to approximately 100,000. You had 100,000 Hispanics in 1900 that were living in the United States. Now, but at the same time, the black population had moved from 4.5 to 5 million up to 11, almost 12 million blacks living in the United States. Now you're a mathematician. Watch that. Now watch these numbers. Now you got 100,000 in 1900. You got 100,000 Hispanics, and you got almost 12 million black folk. Now for the next 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, they got the same identical birth rate. And watch this. They got the same identical birth rate for 100 years with 100,000 Hispanics and almost 12 million blacks. Now by 2000, guess what? Hispanics then had increased and caught blacks. That 100,000 caught up with black folk and surpassed them. So where now they are 57 million and black folk are 44 million. That signifies almost a 5,500% increase in population. Multiply that and see what your percentage of population in the same identical birth rate, because they came in from immigration. Between 1970 and 1990, the population numbers of Hispanics coming to this country went up over 300% in that 20-year period. That's why right now, that about 92% of all the Hispanics in the United States have been here less than 40 years. And yet they own and control more businesses, got more income, wealth, and power and resources than black folk. And when 92% haven't even been in the country for less than 40 years. And now you're down on the border bringing in more while your own people are being stagnated and buried. Now you say, well, we got the right to vote. Now let's go to your vote. If you're voting in a number, but where you're outnumbered 10 to 1, Dr. Watkins, who needs your vote? If I would throw you the example I like to use, if you put 10 people in a room, 9 of them are Ku Klux Klan members, and 1 is a black person. They're gonna vote on what they're gonna have, who's gonna be lynched. Who cares what the black man vote means is irrelevant, not necessary. It's overshadowed by the opposition. In this country right now, if blacks are numbered 9-1 to 10-1 against whites, and all these Asians, Arabs, and Hispanics also classified as whites. They are conservative. They're going to go with the conservative party. Democrats keep opening the door, pushing to bring in more immigrants, and but half those immigrants are not going to go with the Democratic Party. They're going to go with the Republican Party. They are conservatives. They came in from conservatives, whether they're Arabs, Asian, Hispanics. They are conservatives.
Well,
they're going to bury black folk.
Well, as you mentioned in your book, it's a good point that many of the people that come from Latin America are descendants of people who benefited from slavery. Like they have, great grandparents who benefited from bringing black slaves to Latin America. And also, that what you just said, that number, I mean, I want to repeat that, what you just said about the numbers, because I think black folks have to pay attention to this. You said this, this was really your concept more so than mine, but, it looks like immigration policy, just sort of allowing people to just come across the border like it ain't no thing and making us believe that should be okay, that's been designed to deliberately dilute the influence of black voters. Because if it wasn't for all the illegal immigration and the legal immigration that's allowed, we would actually have a vote that really counted. Like you said, in 1840 approximately, there was 4,000 Hispanics and 4 million black people. So we outnumbered the Hispanic population 1,000 to 1. In 1900, there was 100,000 to 12 million. And you could have still continued with immigration in a fair way and allow black people to still not be diluted. But you knew of now where, you got over 50, 60 million Hispanic people, 11 million people here illegally. And black folks, we're 40 million people. So we can't, the illegal population is 1/4 of our total population, and the legal immigrant population far exceeds our population. So it's almost like we've got to the point where we just literally shot our own selves in the foot. We gave all of our political power away because we got people that are telling us things that just are not true.
That's right. You are a black folk in America. Black native blacks are a planned minority. It's like going all the way back to slavery. You are a systematically planned minority. The immigration laws kept you as a minority. That's why up until about 1924, you had a zero quota on black folk coming into the country as immigrants. Didn't you know that? They got a zero quota on you. And they modified it. They modified it in 1965 in the Civil Rights Law. When they modified the immigration laws, what they said is that let's modify, we can bring in more people. But they said, let's base it on family, reuniting the family. The same thing, the trick they're using now. Let's use it for reunite the family. They knew that if you had a zero quota, Dr. Watkins, please help me through this thinking. If they had a zero quota on you coming here and for centuries, and it was open for everybody else, as many whites, doors wide open for immigrants, and they had a limited for amount number for Hispanics and Arabs and Asians, but they had a zero quota on blacks. Then in 1965, they come up with a new immigration law. So here's what we do. For family reunification, we're gonna now put in an immigration policy based on reuniting with your ancestors or your relatives that are here. If you haven't had any, Dr. Watkins, and you help me with this now, because I know you understand this. Help me with this. How do you fathom that? I mean, what kind of intelligence does that signify?
It's mathematics. 0 times 100 is 0. 0 times 1,000 is 0. So if you have not let black people come into the country anyway, then there is no reuniting the families, because there was nobody even allowed in to open the door. And you're right. You have and I want everybody who has Black Labor, White Wealth, if you don't have it, get it for your children. This is a book your kids need to read before they read any book written by any European, Asian author, or anybody else. Have them read Black Labor, White Wealth. This book changed my life. That's why it's ripped up and everything else. Because I think history is important. Black folks don't know history. That's why we fall for these things. But on table 7 and page 105, you show in 1967 and versus 1991. You have the median income levels of the different groups, but then you also have in another table, table 6 on page 101, you show the U.S. government's preferential ordering of immigrants according to official quotas in 1924. And basically, I'm gonna summarize this for everybody. Basically, on this chart on page 101 in Black Labor, White Wealth, if you were white, if you were English, anybody could come. As many people as possible could come if they were from England. If you were Irish, from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, then they have various numbers: 34,000, 28,000, 51,000 per year. Southern Europe, 3,800. Then it starts to dip off. It starts to reduce when you get to Middle East, Far East, and Hispanic. Those numbers drop. But here's the kicker, everybody. Pay attention now. When they get to the part of African nationality, Black people, the number is 0. It says closed. That means it ain't a low quota, high quota, no quota. There's no number. The number is 0. They said we do not want any Black people from other countries coming into the United States. That's what immigration policy has been for us for a very, very long time. Dr. Anderson,
how does that make any sense then if you wait to 1965 and say we'll now let you come in based on your previous pattern and your previous family relationships and ties in this country? I mean, in other words, we'll let you have shoes if you can show us you have some shoes. If you say I never had any shoes, then they said, well, you can't get any shoes. I find it just grossly offensive. Maybe I'm the only one in my history. As a forensic historian, that just always bothered me. I said, my people can't be that intellectually lazy, or why would they fall for bamboozlement every time?
Well, you know what it reminds me of is like how they have these little deals in inner cities where they'll say you can buy the building for $1, but you have to already own property in the neighborhood, and they know that the Black folks, most of them don't own any property, but they'll sell it to white folks and Asian folks and Arabs and whoever is in the neighborhood for $1 because they already own a building in the neighborhood. Or when you were talking about the 1866 Indian Treaty, and you were talking about how Black folks got written out of all the money that was supposed to go to Native American tribes because they basically said, what was it, that your grandfather had to be full-blood Indian or something like that? Is that what it was?
It's called the blood quantum law.
Yeah, right. The blood quantum law, right? And what's interesting to me, Dr. Anderson, is that every time they can use lineage to exclude Black folks, they love doing that. They love saying, well, if your grandfather didn't do XYZ, then you can't do XYZ. But they never lineage is rarely allowed to benefit Black folks. Because if they made another law that said, look, if your great-great-great-grandparent was a slave, then you get a certain amount of money. If you can prove that your triple great or quadruple great grandmother or grandfather was a slave, then we'd have an influx of money coming into the Black community. But that's one area they won't talk about. So all these people that want us to get all sensitive and touchy-feely about what they're doing to illegal immigrants who chose to violate the law and break into another country, they've never shown that same level of sympathy for Black people who are in even worse conditions, where their parents didn't choose to do anything. Their parents didn't choose to break any laws, didn't hurt anybody, but yet their families were broken up. They went through trauma, but none of these same people had any sympathy for that.
Right, and if you look at the Black history reader, and in the section, I think they look at page I think it's where I put in the income levels in the country. Did you see that in your book there?
I have my copy downstairs. I got my other one in Powernomics right here, but I got my Black history reading in my other office downstairs. Well, please go ahead.
It says that the real median household income by race and Hispanic origin of households from 1967 to 2014. From 1967, Dr. Watkins, to 2014. And you have it now in front of you?
I'm looking in Black Labor, White Wealth. You have another chart, but it's
the Black history reading now. And it says on there, look at this, it says a median family income. And guess who's on the bottom? The top income brackets now are filled by Asians. Asians coming to the country. They get where their income is double Black folk. They didn't even start coming into the country in big magnitudes until about 1985, as I said, before 1990. Hispanics, they're over Black folk. Everybody's got Black folk on the bottom. and all these immigrants. This is put out by the United States Department of Commerce and the Census Research, right there. Tell them to go to page 4 in the Black History Reader. It shows you that black folks still own and control not more than 1/2 or 1% of anything in the country. They got an unemployment rate, their median income is below everybody's. They own and control practically nothing. From New York to San Diego, they don't own any of these big buildings. Look at the big buildings, the trucking company, the airlines, the ships, the boats, the restaurants, the hotels. They own nothing. And yet these immigrants have come into the country since, that is as indicated by the federal government, since 1967. And now they've surpassed black folk and have doubled everything over black folk in between 1967 and 2014. Just using it as an example. Now you got black civil rights leaders. They don't know this. You got black elected officials and appointed. They don't know this. They don't know that there are people being buried alive. What are they smoking? Whatever they're smoking is illegal then. And see what they should be fighting for down on the border right now is said, yes, we're concerned about these young kids being separated. But what we're also even more concerned about is our own self-interest. Why don't you put black folk in a protected class as the way they're supposed to be? Why aren't blacks in a protected class just like white women in a protected class and American Indians in a protected class? Blacks were at one time in history, they were in a protected class called the Freedmen Bureau. They were in a protected class for about 2 years, from about 1865 to 1867, when Andrew Johnson said, no, we ain't gonna protect these blacks. We're gonna turn them loose as ex-slaves, turn them loose with no land, no privileges, no rights, no tools, no animals, no weapons, no clothes, no jobs, no businesses, no education, and no organizations. And that way tell them to compete with nothing. That was put into the literature, that you would leave slavery with nothing. But by the same token, whites who have been in here as indentured servants, they were in there for a 7-year, 5 to 7 year contract. They got free land, they got free labor, they got pays, they got wages. They were given an animal, a horse, and some tools to be able to survive, and weapons. These are poor whites that came to the country. But and Hispanics, they weren't even in the country. But nobody's ever done anything for black folk, because black folk are the third rail in our society. They'll do anything for anybody before they do it for black folk. And I'm just totally adamantly disappointed in our so-called visible blacks. Tell your listeners, go watch every day on TV. Watch TV. In the news, they're going to have some black there who's probably an immigrant from another country, from the Caribbean or Africa, talking about, well, we need to bring in more immigration. They're not native blacks. No native blacks got any sense going to be saying that. They didn't up until the 1900s. And now the other thing you see, that blacks should be put into protected class. But black folks should also be entitled to all those benefits they're giving all those immigrants. Give it to these native blacks. Go into Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and then St. Louis, Detroit, Michigan, and give them those same rights and privileges. Help those black folks start businesses. And next week when I come on your program, I'm gonna give you a list of all the money that's been given out to all these different Asians, Arabs, and Hispanic groups that never gave black folk, this company never gave black folk a penny. They gave it to the immigrants. I'm gonna show you exactly what immigrants have been getting in very quantifiable terms as money and incentives and opportunities for business development and for building communities and getting the best education. That's like right now up in Harvard University today. They're concerned about the Asians not being able to being controlled or limited, and how many of them can penetrate the college enrollment system. And yet by the same token, they did the same thing back in the early 1920s. They went to Jews, and everybody came in to dominate black folk. But they never say, what are we going to do specifically to change the imposed ignorance that we imposed on black folk, and we said it was against the law to teach a black person to read and write. What are they going to do to try to balance out the scale on black folk? Nobody wants to do it. It's a third rail. And right now, black folk got to wake up and smell the coffee. And what I said to you when I started your program is, what does it take? What does it take for black folk to wake up, Dr. Watkins?
Well, I'll tell you what, there are black people that are awake. There are things that I have said about this issue publicly recently that received a reaction from black folks that probably I wouldn't have got a decade ago. I think there's a lot of black people that have really been educated, and I think they're being educated by people like yourself who are giving them history. I think that what you teach is so important because you're giving the historical context to let people understand how the game's being played. So black people might be behind, but we don't stay behind. Some of us won't stay behind. There's I believe a class of black folks that I think this is the accelerated class, if you want to call it. I'm talking about a class of black folks who ain't stupid. They might have started at the bottom, but they're gonna get to the top, and they know how to break out of these systems. They know how to think for themselves, and it's going to be a revolution. It's going to require a revolution of us breaking away from all of those chains, so we can just decide for ourselves what the truth should be and what our opinion should be. And so I think that these conversations are real important. And what I love about it is that I wanted to talk to you every week, and I'm glad you agreed to do this, because when you don't know their history, they can play the same trick on you over and over and over again. I mean, just for example, there's about 4 or 5 things you pointed out from 100 years ago that we never learned in school that I think probably blew people's minds. I mean, if that happened to you, if y'all watching and that's how you feel, say something, say thank you, or let them know you appreciate them, because we don't show appreciation to the people in our community that are really fighting for us. We'll show more appreciation to a rapper than we show to a scholar that cares about the community. Now, rappers are cool, but scholars are better in terms of being able to make you smart. A rapper can entertain you like he entertains white folks. A scholar will elevate you and make your life better if he's the right kind of scholar. So, Dr. Anderson, let me give you the last word before I let you get back to your busy day. What do you think is kind of like a closing thought that people could walk away with to really understand how to process legal and illegal immigration, where you can still be sympathetic, but at the same time be more sympathetic to your own people and your own cause at the same time?
I think the black folk need to somehow have a major convention, a major situation where black folk will wake up and smell the coffee to these situations and be introduced to the facts and of life. And because right now in America, black interests, black needs, and black dilemma is a lost priority in our society. And while it's being a lost priority in our society, because we have a ranking order of privileges and rights and power in our society, blacks will wind up at the bottom as the official permanent scapegoats. Every time something negative happens, they're going to go after black folk. They're not going after the immigrants. You're not going to hear about anybody lynching and castrating Asians, Arabs in this country. They're going after black folk. We have a pecking order, a feeding chain going from the highest to the lowest. Sometimes whites call it a trickle-down practice, trickle-down theories of economics and everything else. Black folk are on the bottom in everything you can think of. They're carrying 6 to 8 times their fair share of everything that's bad, but they can't get more than 1/2 or 1% of anything that's good and value and that they can compete with and use to elevate the quality of their lives. They're not capable of competing. They don't have the resources and the tools. And so consequently, as our society begins to implode and go down under Trump and the rest of these people, that these people are going to come after black folk. At first, you might hear the KKK starting up, or the conservatives going after the primary target they're going to get. They're going to be black folk. They might badmouth Jews. They might badmouth the women. They might badmouth Arabs and Asians and Hispanics, but they're going to go after black folk. Black folk are going to be the scapegoat. And when terrorism comes back to this country again, the most vulnerable people are going to be black neighborhoods. The black neighborhoods are not organized. They have no basic institutions. They have no leadership. They've been abandoned. They're obsolete. They've been set up to get wiped off the face of the earth. They don't come together very quickly and start to understand these things I'm telling you about black history. I wrote all 5 of my books when I left government, and I've been blessed by being with the highest levels of government for every level, from local to state to governors, with presidents, head of trade missions around the world. And I learned from all those experiences that black folk are the scapegoats. They're going to be on the bottom. They are totally ill-prepared to compete. But they've been bought into this social mythology, the social illusions, that somehow black folk are in a category called minorities. And therefore, they're going to get equal treatment. Black folk, even in the category minority, black folk on the bottom. White women dominate the minority category. Now Asians are going to dominate. Now Hispanics are going to dominate it. Blacks get nothing out of minority. They got to start going for reparations. They got to start to organize themselves. They got to rebuild their communities. They got to start being producers rather than consumers. They got to get some new kind of leadership in this country real fast. Do not depend on these civil rights leaders, these black elected officials, to do anything for them. Do not depend on the black overclass. The black overclass and the black elected officials and the black civil rights leaders have already gotten their meritorious manumission. They've been declared as bona fidely safe. They're safe. They're not going to leave their safe position to do anything for black folk. So that's what I would say to you in conclusion. They better wake up and smell the coffee. And as I said to you initially, what does it take to wake them up?
Well, I tell you what, I always tell my students, I've been telling them for a long time, that you was the first person I ever met in 2006. You were the first person I ever met who told me that it was a good thing to be radical. You know, I remember that, and I laugh about that to this day, because you talk about the safe Negroes versus unsafe. I used to go on CNN a lot back in the day, and they still call me, to do an interview, because one of their black producers will see me and say, "Oh, he'd be great for this segment." And then I always tell them, I say, "Well, make sure you go do your research. Make sure you know what you're signing up for, because I'm not a typical Negro." And they inevitably, every time, they come back and they cancel. They say, "Oh, we decided to go in a different direction, or we something came up, And I say, "Good, that's what I thought. That's what I thought." Because I think that we need everybody watching. I need y'all to stop being the safe Negroes and start being the unsafe Negroes. Be the unsafe Negroes, because if there's enough unsafe Negroes, you could be safe with us. All we need is to keep working together, building our own institutions, being strong together, and we keep each other safe. Don't be safe. Stop being safe in the face of irresponsible tyranny. That's it. Just stop being safe. Be who you're supposed to be. Follow your heart, follow your passion, follow your soul, follow who you believe that you are, and don't let these people take you away from that with that foolishness and that nonsense and those lies and that craziness. Like my grandmother used to call it foolishness. That's why I got that word from grandma. But she call it foolishness. Like she said, boys, why are you getting caught up in that foolishness? Because you're better than that. So that's what I say to the Negroes who are running around on TV and everything, getting all irate over illegal immigration, but ain't really done hardly nothing in terms of fighting for real issues in the black community. That should be a top priority, in my opinion. So I want to say thank you, Dr. Anderson, for your time. I appreciate it. And everybody,
thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And everybody,
go ahead. By next week when we come in, I want your listeners to call and tell me what they found out, what they think it takes for black folk to wake up, and for a black man to be a man, and for black folk to be black to their heart, and to be native blacks in America.
All right, there you go. So y'all got the homework assignment. The doctor has spoken. If you want to find out more about Dr. Anderson's work, your children should know about him. He's our version of the Albert Einsteins, in terms of the people that you study in school that you're supposed to look up to, the Booker T's and Malcolm and all that. Dr. Claude Anderson is our generation's version of those people, except greater, in my opinion. And I think that your children should know about them. So go to harvestinstitute.org. That's harvestinstitute.org. Please stop through also and consider making a donation. We must support our black think tanks. I'm really pushing to persuade you to support, because if we don't support our own, then why would we be surprised when our own sells out? So let's make sure we support. Also, if you want to come out to a place where we are making plans, we are engaged in action, we are getting things done, Dr. Anderson will be there along with a lot of other very intelligent black people. Go to the All Black National Convention. That's going to be in Philadelphia, September 27th through the 30th. You can find out more, buy your tickets early, so the price is lower, at allblacknationalconvention.com. That's allblacknationalconvention.com. And make sure you like, subscribe, and share, and all that stuff before you head out of here. So thanks again, Dr. Anderson. It was great. And I'll see you guys soon. So take care. Have a good day. And we love all of you.
Bye-bye. Okay, thank you, bud. I look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, sir. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye now.